What's going on, gardeners? It's Sunday, June 18th, and the heat and humidity is here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, but we are starting to harvest tomatoes. And on today's video, I'm going to show you the most wildly productive varieties of tomatoes in my tomato garden, as well as take you on a tour of the other varieties, and hopefully they will inspire you on exactly what you may want to grow in your tomato garden next season. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and spread shop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated. And the tomato that we're going to start off with is the indeterminate tomato that blows my mind every single year, and that is the big beef tomato. I think this may be the most productive beefsteak tomato out there. And just look at all of the tomatoes that are on this plant. I mean, loaded is an understatement. There must be easily 15 to 20 pounds of tomatoes on this plant. And because it is a hybrid, despite the fact that these tomatoes are so large, they are ripening already. I mean, just look at that. That is crazy, and because this is heat set capable, it is still setting fruit up top. So these tomatoes are likely going to pollinate right here, and as the season progresses, I will have more and more beefsteak tomatoes off of the big beef. I cannot recommend this variety highly enough. This is always one of the shining stars in my garden. The second tomato variety that's blowing my mind in terms of productivity is one that I bought on a whim because I liked the way the tomato looked and was photographed in the seed catalog, and that is Carmello. This tomato variety may be giving big beef a run for its money. Just look at this thing. It has tomatoes that are setting all the way up top there, so it looks like it's pretty good at setting tomatoes in the heat. But as you go down on this plant, look at the enormous clusters of tomatoes. And this variety, it doesn't look like the fruits are quite as large as big beef, but they are ripening even earlier. So again, there must be 10 to 15 pounds of tomatoes that are on this tomato plant right here. It is shocking how productive this thing is. And the other thing that's nice about it is, despite the fact that this tomato plant it's been in the ground since March, it is still not really affected by disease. So I think it's probably pretty disease resistant as well. So if you're looking for a really productive beefsteak tomato variety, give Carmello a shot, because look at those fruits in there. Just huge clusters and almost 100% pollination and no signs of blossom end rot. Just look at that shot right there. Those are all Carmello tomatoes. Is that not just absurd? The third tomato plant that I want to feature that is outrageously productive is Sunchocola. I was looking for a purple black cherry tomato that could handle my climate here. I tried growing black cherry last year and it was terrible. It had poor production and the plant died almost immediately. It was so disease susceptible. And I think I may have struck gold with this Sunchocola. The fruits are absolutely enormous, and the productivity is off the charts. There are so many fruit clusters everywhere. The pollination is incredible, and the plant itself is almost free of disease. It looks so good. Just look at the productivity in there. And I have a second plant that is growing in my garden as well that's a little bit easier to see, not in these straw bales. This plant right here is the Sunchocola that is growing in ground in my raised bed garden. It's having a lot more issues with disease because of all the splashing, but it still looks pretty good compared to most of the plants next to it. And you can see how monstrous these fruits are, and they're also pretty early as well for a cherry tomato. This is close to a 2-inch diameter cherry tomato. They are some of the biggest cherry tomatoes that I've ever seen. So you can compare, here is a SunGold fruit that I just picked off the plant next to it, compared to a Sunchocola fruit. It is literally 2 to 3 times the size of a SunGold. So you are dealing with some incredible, absolutely monstrous cherry tomatoes right there. The fourth plant I want to feature is a plant I've been growing every year for 7 years in a row, and I can't not grow it. And that is Brandy Boy, which is a hybridized version of Brandywine Pink that Burpee produces. And this plant, not only is it almost up to the top of my 8-foot tall trellis, it is loaded with more fruit than I've ever seen it load up on. And these fruits are just massive. All of those fruits are off of this single plant. And I mean, they're the size of softballs. There are so many fruits down there that I honestly don't know what I'm going to do with all of them if I get them to successfully ripen. This is ludicrous production for a Brandywine type. You can't get production like that off of a straight up heirloom Brandywine. They're just too disease susceptible. But off of these hybridized versions, which taste almost identical, you can get crazy production. And there is also almost no disease on this plant, despite the fact that it is mid-June. I'm starting to get just a few traces of blight way down low. That actually might be blight that I killed by spraying some hydrogen peroxide on it. I'll link to a video down in the video description as to how I do that. But man, oh man, this is some amazing production, and I cannot recommend this variety more highly. The next super productive variety is the cherry tomato that I'm most excited to grow, and that is Pink Princess. Now, I'm growing this variety for one reason and one reason only. A commenter back in the winter was raving about how this is better than SunGold, and I did some research on this variety, and it seemed that a lot of people were concurring that it is in fact better than SunGold. And up until this point, I think SunGold is the best tasting cherry tomato. It just isn't very vigorous, it's very prone to splitting, and it's not very disease resistant. So I'm really excited to try and replace it. So this is Pink Princess. I got it simply based on their recommendation. And boy, oh boy, look at the production on this plant. Just off the charts. All of those fruit clusters are Pink Princess. It may be one of my tallest plants. It's literally 7 feet tall. It's a foot off the top of this trellis. And it's also having almost no disease issues. It is way ahead of the other varieties in terms of its vigor and overall health. Now, my understanding about Pink Princess is that it's not perfectly stable yet. It's still a new variety, so there's a little bit of genetic variation in there, but that variation is probably also helping its vigor because it's not quite as inbred as some of the older varieties out there. So it seems to be a very good disease-resistant hybrid, and I have a few that are starting to turn down here. If this is truly better than SunGold, you better believe I will have a follow-up video all about it. The next incredible variety I want to feature is Black Plum. Now, I received this from tomato growers as a free packet of seed, and this variety, I believe, is an open-pollinated variety, but it isn't quite old enough to be an heirloom yet. It was introduced into the ecosystem in the 90s, and a plant has to be 50 years or older to be an heirloom, so it hasn't quite yet hit that mark in terms of age to hit heirloom status. Now, I usually avoid varieties like this because they're so prone to disease, and this is definitely showing more disease than any of the hybrids. However, even if this plant were to quit on me right now, it wouldn't matter because the clusters of fruit are so huge, and there are so many of them that if this is all the plant were to ever give me, it would be more than enough. They are funny-looking, teardrop-shaped tomatoes, and they are almost like a cross between a Roma type and a cherry type. Just amazing production, and I can't wait to try them. They're supposed to be spectacularly delicious, and I have another Black Plum variety growing in ground in my raised bed garden as well. Here's the Black Plum growing in my raised bed garden. It's a lot smaller because it is much younger than the plant in my straw bales, but still you can see the incredible production of very unique looking, very interesting fruit. And if this continues to hold up, and then I will have no problem keeping it in my garden, especially if it tastes good. I mean, these are huge for cherry tomatoes. Just look at that monster fruit right there. So this kind of fell off. I can try to give it a taste test right now. Definitely a little bit underripe. I will have to keep you posted on this. I shouldn't have knocked that tomato off. That needed another few days. But they're starting to turn, and I can't wait to try them properly. I don't know if I've ever featured a Dwarf Tomato Project tomato on my list of super productive tomatoes before, but for whatever reason, Tasmanian chocolate this year is just doing incredibly well. This is only a 2-foot tall plant, and just look at the production of enormous tomatoes on it. These things are mostly in the half a pound to 1 pound range. It is just loaded for bear on that little tiny plant. So Tasmanian chocolate, total winner this season. This goes to show you that even small plants can produce huge results if you fertilize them well and hand pollinate them. And the last variety of tomato that I want to feature that is super productive is one that I feature every single year because I just can't find a red cherry tomato that performs better, and that is Super Sweet 100. I have two Super Sweet 100 plants growing side by side here, and of course the production is absolutely off the charts. The tomatoes are already ripening back here. I've been picking them for about a week now, and there are plenty more tomatoes where that came from. Just everywhere you look, it's almost like being under some kind of grapevine in Mount Olympus. Super Sweet 100 is just too easy to grow. I'm growing one single plant up my little garden teepee right here. That is one plant that's suckering and producing like this. So if you can just keep the rainfall off of them, and you'll pretty much keep the disease off. This is super disease resistant. You'll just get outrageous amounts of production. Really, for most families, I wouldn't be surprised if just 2 or 3 plants were enough to give you cherry tomatoes for the entire season. That's how ludicrous this plant is. Those are the varieties of tomatoes that I'm growing this year that are blowing my mind when it comes to production. Now I'm going to take you through the rest of my tomato garden and show you the other varieties of tomatoes that I'm growing that may not make the list of absurd production, but they're still doing really well overall, and if you like the looks of them, they may inspire you to add them to your list next year. We're going to start off with Better Boy. Better Boy is one of those old original hybrids that you see all over the place. It's super popular, and I've never grown it before, so I decided to actually pick up a 6-pack I found on clearance for like $2, and I planted a few here and there to give it a try. So it's a lot later than my other tomatoes. That's why it is not as productive. I didn't get this into the ground until a lot later. That's why it's so short compared to the other ones, so it's not an apples to apples comparison. However, it's still doing really well and giving me big clusters full of beefsteaks, and I've been resisting growing this variety my entire life because I think it's just so common, but I really need to stop being biased like that and give it an honest shake. Then right next to it is a Wild Boar Farms cultivar called Lucid Gem. Now usually I fail miserably with these funny colored, striped, and variegated tomatoes because my climate is so miserable, but this one, for whatever reason, is heat set tolerant and super disease resistant. It was one of my last plants to die in my garden last year. I couldn't believe how well it did, and the production is off the charts. I almost should have added this to my most productive varieties. The only reason why I didn't is I had some issues with it splitting in the rain last year, but we're having a drier year this year, so I hope to give it a fairer shake. Then right next to it is Big Brandy. Big Brandy is very similar to Brandy Boy. It is a Brandywine pink hybrid, so it is almost exactly like Brandywine pink, but because it's a hybrid, it is a lot more disease resistant with much larger yields. Just look at this thing. I mean, huge clusters. This is Brandy Boy right next to it, so Brandy Boy definitely is a bit more productive and has larger fruits, but that doesn't say that Big Brandy isn't awesome on its own. Then we have Brandywine Yellow. Brandywine Yellow is usually the bane of my existence because it is my favorite tasting beefsteak tomato. It is absolutely fantastic, but the production is usually horrible. But for whatever reason, maybe it was the really cool May and early June, maybe it's the fact that I'm growing in straw bales for the first time ever, and we're just having a drier season, and I've really stayed on top of things with my toothbrush hand pollination, but I am getting crazy yields on Brandywine Yellow. Usually I only get about 6 tomatoes on an entire plant, but this year I seem to be getting closer to a dozen. So all of those fruits that you see right there are all Brandywine Yellow, and you can see how big they are. They usually average up to close to a pound. So super excited that for the first time ever I'm getting Brandywine Yellow in abundance. Then I have one of the only heirloom slicing tomatoes that does well where I live, Arkansas Traveler. Arkansas Traveler, for whatever reason, is super disease resistant and rain resistant, and the fruits are usually somewhere around in the 6 to 8 ounce range, and it's super productive, and I guess because it was bred for the Arkansas climate, that's why this one variety seems to be one of the rare disease-resistant heirlooms. So if you live in the South and you want to grow an heirloom, consider Arkansas Traveler. And last but not least in my straw bale garden is SunSugar. SunSugar is very similar to SunGold, except it is larger and more split resistant. I would say it's not quite as sweet as SunGold. SunGold has better flavor overall, but it's much more productive and more disease resistant. So my SunSugar is doing a really good job in my garden, as it always does, and I will continue to grow it because it's so productive. And on that note, we will move right into SunGold. SunGold is my favorite tasting cherry tomato to date. The only negative about it is it's very disease susceptible for a hybrid, and the fruits tend to split when it gets really wet. So when we get hot, dry weather, boy, it is just the best tasting thing ever, but you can see how badly it's suffering in terms of disease. That's why I also grow SunSugar. SunGold usually is one of the first to die in my garden, but because it tastes so good, it is worth growing anyway, and if you live in a drier or cooler climate, you will likely have a lot more success than me. This is a variety called Unicorn, and I chose this variety to try and replace Super Sweet 100 because while I love Super Sweet 100, it's just kind of a sweet tomato. I'm looking for a more complex, standout, productive variety, and so far it is not holding up. But my early seedling died and I couldn't plant it in straw bales, so I don't have a direct apples to apples comparison, and the straw bales are just outperforming my in-ground garden. It looks like the production is still really good, but the plant is definitely having some disease issues, so I will have to try again next year with Unicorn, and hopefully my spring seedlings will all come out more consistent and I won't have that issue. Now I will take you around to my Dwarf Tomato Project varieties. This variety right here is called Purple Rain. It is a dwarf tomato. The foliage is very heavy, so it's a little bit hard to see exactly what's growing on under there. They are a variegated tomato, and I can't wait to see how they taste and how they look. Then next to that is one I've been growing for a few years now called Rosella Crimson. This struggled badly in the rain last year, but we're having a drier June this year, so I'm hoping I get some better tomatoes. As you can see, this one is already starting to ripen on me. Over here is one of my absolute favorite tomatoes on the face of the earth, and that is Rosella Purple. The foliage is so dense that it is a little bit hard to see what's growing on under here. Now, Rosella Purple is not very good in the heat. It likes the cooler weather, so I grow it in containers earlier in the season. However, this variety this year, because of the cooler weather, seems to be doing pretty good this late in the season. So this is one I've been raving about. It's a dead ringer for Cherokee Purple in terms of taste, but generally speaking, I think it is more productive, and I think it honestly tastes even better. Maybe you can see, okay, you can see from under here, this is a little bit better of a view for the fruits. You can see what we're talking about in terms of productivity and the looks. These plants right here are a large beefsteak green tomato called Dwarf Emerald Giant. This is one of my favorite tasting dwarf tomatoes. These can reach a pound each. The production is very good for a dwarf tomato on these little tiny plants. You can see what we're looking at here. A really beautiful plant. I'm even growing another one over here in my pepper bed that I planted a lot later that is doing pretty well. The fruits are a lot smaller because I planted it later in the season. The last dwarf tomato project variety that I'm going to share with you is one I've been growing for 5 or 6 years now, and that is called Adelaide Festival, which is a beautiful, delicious, variegated dwarf tomato project tomato. You can see how large they get. They can easily reach close to a pound each. My plants got a lot of disease this year on this variety for whatever reason, but we should still get a fairly decent harvest of about half a dozen very large tomatoes off of this small but very impressive plant. Now, I normally start these tomato tours with my determinate tomatoes, and I'm a huge fan of determinate varieties, but they had a terrible season this year because I had to travel so much for work back in the spring. In this bed right here, I have 4 varieties: Legend, Bella Rosa, Celebrity, Plus, and LaRoma 3, and I just wasn't able to give these plants the attention that they deserved, and in a 10.5-inch rainstorm that we had, 3 of them died from wilt virus, no fault of their own. This is purely based on my own neglect. I don't want to show you too much because it will give all of these varieties a bad name that they don't deserve. This is what the Legend tomato looks like. You can see even through my neglect, they are producing pretty well. The LaRoma 3s are absolutely off the charts productive. Everywhere you look that you see aroma tomato are the LaRoma 3s. These things seem to be pretty close to bulletproof, and I will definitely be growing them again next year to give them a fairer shake, because I just didn't have the time to keep up with them. You can see they're spilling out of my raised beds everywhere. All of those are LaRoma 3. I was really looking forward to growing Celebrity Plus, but I just neglected them too much and they weren't able to hold up to the weather. Right here you can see the Bella Rosa. They usually are fantastic and off the charts productive, but again, I just wasn't able to keep up with them this year. I will have to plant them again in the fall garden to give them a better shake. You're seeing a lot of this wilt virus take over, and it's just not fair to actually classify these tomatoes because it's my own neglect that has mostly caused these issues. The last variety that I grew this year is one that I can't show you right now because the plants are already done for the year. It's a super early determinate variety called Siletz that was specifically bred for the cool climate of the Pacific Northwest, and it loves really cool temperatures. Now, I already harvested all of my Siletz fruits, but this is basically what you can expect. It is a delicious heirloom quality tasting fruit. So if you want a determinate tomato that tastes absolutely fantastic, grow Siletz. It just needs to be grown in the late winter and early spring when it's still cool. I've already chopped down the plant and I'm going to scrap this for the season because they're done. But what you can expect out of them are 4 to 8 ounce tomatoes of slicing quality that are great on sandwiches and salads. It is my favorite early determinate variety. And that right there are the most productive varieties of tomatoes that I'm growing this year, as well as a tour of all the other varieties of tomatoes that I'm growing. And I hope this video was very inspiring for you and you saw some things that you can add to your seed list next year. I absolutely love growing a wide diversity of tomatoes, and when you do this, you tend to have a good season no matter what kind of weather you have, because when you grow all of these different types and cultivars, something is bound to do well. Now, there was a lot of information in this video, so I time-stamped all of the different varieties that I feature so you'll be able to easily access them, and if you have any questions about them, please ask them down in the comments below and I will do my best to answer your questions. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video fun, entertaining, and helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when we release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden to help things grow really strongly, I have all of the products that I use in real life linked in my Amazon storefront down in the video description. So if you expand the video description, you'll find my Amazon link for everything I use in real life. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Daly just got back from his morning walk outside, and boy is it starting to get hot out, and my boy is just pooped. He had a nice cold drink of water and he is passed out. Dale loves his walk and he puts all his energy into it. So he's tired because he was working hard out there, tracking down every single sniff in the neighborhood.